gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, episode of the Hyperconscious Podcast. Today we have our first in-person guest in the new studio, and I am very happy, glad, and proud that it is the one and only Mark Metry. We have not seen Mark in person in 3 months.
Yeah,
we were going to the longer.
Yeah,
we were going to the gym every week. We were masterminding at Chick-fil-A. I was hammering morning chicken sandwiches.
Oh yeah,
so much has changed. How you doing, my man?
Dude, I don't even know, man. Overall good though.
Overall good. So we were on a mastermind call. So we mastermind with Mark every week, and we were chatting about like life stuff and behind the scenes stuff. And Alan and I were like, "Yo, we have to sit down and just talk with Mark and see what comes up," just because your level of awareness is super high. Here we go. Your level of awareness is super high, and behind the scenes, we're always talking about this. Like even our masterminds, it's really not very businessy. We're usually talking about this stuff, and I think that this year, 2020, has been the year of like uncovering, and I wanted to just see what you felt about what's going on in the world, what you're experiencing. How you're dealing with it, all of that stuff. So let's just go deep, see what happens.
I think this is the year where a lot of people, really look at themselves in the mirror between, everyone's kind of like smiling face and really just kind of look at the reality. And, the truth is that, there's so much going on in our world today, from economics to the government to, at an individual level. And, it's just kind of interesting. I'm just kind of in the spot where I'm just like listening, because I know that, whenever something happens in history, I think a lot of us can make judgments of what happens like at the moment. But I really do feel like when we look back at this in hindsight, we'll probably look at it completely differently. And so I'm just kind of listening in the spot, just trying to like receive and see what's truly going on versus what I hope to have happen, because that's not reality.
So if you're listening to this in the future, it is today's July 15th. Yeah. So right now we're in the middle of the second wave of coronavirus, what it seems like. Right, Florida is now the epicenter in the world. Black Lives Matter movement, all of that. There's a lot of white supremacy going on. There's a lot of sex trafficking is coming up. So many things are coming up right now.
So much.
So my question to you and anybody, Alan, I'm having trouble when it comes to getting a new level of awareness. For me brings a ton of pain because I reflect on my, not stupidity, but like my ignorance of not understanding. When you have a new sense of awareness in anything, what is your action plan moving forward? Like, what do you do with it?
Okay, I'll answer, but to answer that in my own way, I don't really think. I mean, definitely part of it is an action plan, but I think for me, I think one of the biggest things that I have realized is that the evolution of someone's character is not like it's not like a Pokemon, right? It's not like all of a sudden they're at like this one level, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I don't know if you guys ever played Pokemon.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's like evolving, and now it's this thing. I don't think that's how it works. Obviously, there's a lot of steps in between, but I remember when I was interviewing Mark Manson on my podcast, I think one of the things that he told me that has always stood out and makes a lot of sense is that when you're going through this change, this evolution, there are different stages. The same way that if a family member of yours dies, there's different stages of kind of like death that you go through. Of first, it's kind of you feel guilty, and then you try to erase it, and then you don't want to think about it, but then you do want to think about it. You want to cherish them. And so I think that is happening for all of us. And so I think with these new levels of awareness, there is like part of your character on the inside that is dying, that is no longer going to be alive. And even if that part of you wasn't necessarily good, there's definitely a sort of a grief and remorse that has to come with that. And I think that just happens over time through you choosing to make decisions versus being in the default mode and just doing whatever because it's the easiest. So sometimes I don't think it's necessarily about an action plan, but it's about that letting those stages run.
I agree 100%. So I think the shedding of old skins happens once. Oh, there goes the mic. There goes the mic real quick. Failing forward here. I think the shedding of old skins is happening for a lot of people. I think we're all being shown mirrors that are reflecting, making us all go inward, kind of. I mean, think about it like this. When the whole world shuts down for a time, all of us have to go home, and whether you're in a marriage or an intimate relationship or you're with your close family, like, I don't know about you guys, but I've reflected a lot on my past, and I've faced parts of myself that I think the external things were allowing me to escape from without me even knowing it. So, for example, if you could go to the gym, and I would always say I would take any frustration out on the weights because the weights don't get hurt. And if you don't have a way to express anger, express frustration, that's going to hurt those you love. When I didn't have the gym to do that, what I noticed is that I saw at a deeper level, it's almost like that frustration was amplified to a point where I now had to face some things in my past that I never faced before. And another thing that I'll say, because I've been very fortunate to have 10 full-time clients during most of COVID, and a lot of them have broken off their intimate relationships. Yeah. And I'm also witnessing certain marriages and stuff where it's clear to me that the time they had apart was necessary for them to appreciate one another. And the family dynamics, guys, have been interesting to say the least, because when you're forced in close quarters with those you love, some interesting junk appears that you didn't know was really there because you could walk away, because you could go take a walk, and not to say you still can't, you can still walk, but I think we're all facing parts of ourselves that I don't think we faced because we have to now. And I think some people are running from that still, and other people are facing it. And I feel like I've done a lot of healing, like seriously, a lot of healing during this time.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other thing I think too is, like, it depends on what you make of it, right? Like, I live with Tara now. When things were getting weird and it was like, yo, we're going to get quarantined and we're not going to be able to leave the house, possibly. Like, we don't know. That's what's going on in Italy, right? Like, they're not even allowed to leave the house. That was before. My roommate, Matt, and I decided, like, look, I want to be able to see my girlfriend. You want to be able to see your girlfriend. Your girlfriend works at the hospital. So, like, I'm not going to feel safe if she's coming here, right? And I don't want you not to have her over because of me. So I'm going to go live with Taryn. And we just signed a lease at her place for the next year. So now we're living together. You know, I'm starting to move my stuff from Matt. So for me, it's been one of the, not the better times, but, like, other than the gym not going away, or other than Jim going away, my distractions were almost gone.
Right.
And, like, Tara and I were seeing each other 24/7 constantly, which was interesting, right? Not seeing her twice a week to seeing her every day. But for me, it was like, I really get to focus on the stuff that mattered. Genuinely. And I was the most productive I probably ever been. And now with the gym opened, that's like 2.5 hours of my day gone. Not gone, redirected. And now I'm struggling to get everything done. I just signed on with 2 new clients. But I think it's the season. And I'm grateful to be back. Like, going to the gym is like for me, it's been this, like, it's the missing pieces back. And now that the missing piece is back, it feels sustainable again.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel sustainable for the last 3 months.
I know.
That this giant part of who I am wasn't there.
I know.
And now it's back.
Well, you've been lifting for 12, 15, 13 years.
Since I was 14.
I felt like did I tell you I cried on my way to the gym? Like, happy tears.
Oh, I think you did.
Yeah. And I didn't realize, and that's another thing that I'll say too about this whole thing is, when you have built up emotion of pain that you're not dealing with, I think that's what crying is. I think crying is a trigger that you finally feel all that pain all at once and it overwhelms you. And when I was driving to the gym for the very first time back, and I haven't missed a day since, and I honestly won't, just because I'm so grateful that it's back. So I'm setting a new standard. But when I was crying on my way to the gym, it was crazy because it was happy tears. But I was also like, the fact that I'm crying right now is proof to me that this has been bothering me every day. This has been bothering me since it closed, that I couldn't make progress in an arena that is so near and dear to my heart. It has nothing to do with anyone else. It has nothing to do with whether or not I have abs. It really doesn't. It has to do with this is what grounds me. This is where I find myself. And now I feel more centered than ever now that it's back. But for a long time there, I think we all felt a little bit lost. Not just because of no gym, but because so much change happened in such a short time.
I have a question for you. How, when all of this happened, whether it's coronavirus, Black Lives Matter, any of that, was any part of you afraid to talk about what you believed in? Because I think a lot of people are. Why is
For
that, do
sure.
you think? Because I felt the same way.
I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at that question. I mean, I remember like when the whole thing with Black Lives Matter was starting. I remember I made a post on my Instagram and LinkedIn where I was basically talking about like how racism is a terrible thing, and I talked about how when I was younger I faced so much racism, and it really shaped me into who I am today.
Yeah.
At first in bad ways, but then now good ways. And I mean, 99% of the comments were positive, but there were like multiple people that are like saying something along the lines of like, dude, you're such a like you love attention. This is about black people right now. This isn't about you. And so for me, I was just like, okay, I was just talking about my perspective from the only thing that I can speak on because I'm not black. And so, I mean, I don't know. I think part of it has to do with like political correctness. I think part of it has to do with just like the dynamic of social media of like if you read someone's posts, but then like you've been thinking about something all day and then you read their post and they may not say something specifically, but they're just generally speaking, you may think that whatever it is that they're talking about is actually what you've been thinking about, even though they may not even be separating it. But honestly, I don't know. If it's okay with you, can I take this in a totally different direction?
Yeah, man.
So I think the biggest thing for me and for a lot of people, I think what we have been able to see is, you know, whether it is, you know, seeing how the government has handled the coronavirus, whether it's seeing those videos of, you know, police killing black people, whether people have seen those videos of whether it's, you know, police brutalizing peaceful protesters or thugs attacking police, or just like seeing all the stuff you mentioned, sex trafficking, molestation, all these different things that are happening. And I think for a lot of us, we are now aware that good and evil really do exist. And I don't think it's that like black and white. I think there's a lot of gray. But I think one of the biggest things that prompted this podcast episode together was on a mastermind call, and we were talking about the fact that like a lot of people think that the opposite of war is peace, when in reality it's not. The opposite of war is creation. And so personally for me, I have found out that, you know, there are some crazy people out there who study human psychology, who study mindset, who study all the same things that we study, but they use them for evil. And the reality is even though there are more good people in the world than bad people, I think bad people disproportionately hold way more controlled power. And so I think the biggest thing for us needs to come to terms with this and then really, like, literally start an army to do the opposite of, instead of, you know, trying to go for peace and all that stuff. No, we need to create brand new systems in our society, brand new ways of thinking. Because, like, the reality is this stuff is real. You know, you may see this stuff in a movie, but when it comes to, you know, what's happening, it's totally different. Like, for example, I don't want to get into details, but in a community that I grew up in, basically it turned out that this person who was considered a leader in the community was actually a pedophile and literally molested little children. And like when I think about that, I'm just like, what the actual, you know, like to me in my brain, it's like that. How can that even exist, right? Because there's no way I can imagine myself or anything like that happening. But the reality is that this stuff has been happening for thousands of years, whether it's rape, murder, assault, whatever it is. And whether it has to do with like people really are evil, or people really are good, or it's some mix in between, or people are just doing what they think they got to do to survive. Man, like we need to mobilize, and we need to like just create more leaders out there that are going to be able to start their own movements, because that's the only way that you defeat something. And then when you even break it out into like a bigger ideology of like people who belong in a certain group who think of these certain ideas, the reality is like, even if, for example, even if you kill the, I don't know, like the highest white supremacist leader, white supremacy is still going to be a real thing. Even if you kill the top leader at ISIS, ISIS is still going to be a real thing. If you kill whoever at wherever, that's not actually a solution. You need to start movements of people that create. And so personally, that's something that I've really been thinking about and really been thinking about over the course of, I'm 22, I'll be 23 next week. And just kind of like looking at what I've been doing over the last several years, and then really, really understanding that I really do believe that I don't think like this is the year, but I definitely think that this year is like a demonstration for what's going to happen in the future with the amount of change, with the amount of pain, damage that's going to happen in order for us to grow as a human species. That is something I've been really thinking about. And how can I get more leaders? How can I get more people to create, start their own movement, step into their own leadership? Because, I think about it all the time. For me, like I easily think that I could have easily gone in the other direction. I easily think right now I could be like some sort of I don't know if I can say this on air, but some sort of like a serial killer or some shit, because you often see people who really have like really fell into the struggle of life, really had tough times. Those are like all the people who I interview on my podcast. However, right, those are also all like mass shooters and people who rape and like all this stuff. And so it's really like looking at the grand scheme of humanity throughout thousands of years and like what these things are happening now that seem like they're just happening, even though they've always been happening under this broader theme of like good versus evil. How do we mobilize more people to get on the good side? Because the reality is that you can be a very powerful person and like learn everything that it is that we talk about in Mastermind about. You could use it for evil. I've seen it happen multiple times. And so it's truly looking at that and being like, how do we create the opposite of that? So I don't know. That's like where I went.
I love honestly, man, and I don't love the fact that you said it, but like the fact that you said it kind of takes one bad person. Like they can really flip the script. That's what this tattoo is. Like the tattoo I have it's the devil and an angel playing chess for control of the world, and the angel's crying because the devil's winning. I've always thought that
it's killer.
Because this is what happens, and this is the opposite of anarchy or the opposite of mayhem, whatever it is positive creation. But if one person is creating mayhem, it takes at least one person, probably more, creating peace. And I think the thing is, there's so many, and I'm guilty of this too, of saying like, well, I'm not for this,
right?
But I'm not against it enough to do something about it. And for the listeners, if you're listening to this, like you'll notice that Alan and I have been doing, I would say, more current events type episodes, more like we did an episode on the transgender community. My girlfriend and I watched a documentary about the transgender community. I had no idea half the things that happened. I didn't know that the scene in Ace Ventura, where after he kisses, I don't know what the name of the character is, but he finds out that the woman is a man and he's throwing up and everybody's throwing. I didn't know. I never thought about that from the perspective of somebody who's transgender. Now that I have that awareness, that causes pain for me. Genuinely. And now it's like, okay, what do? We have a platform. I want to talk about it. Right? We did a Black Lives Matter episode. We have a platform. I want to talk about it. So it's just interesting. Like, I had the same thing. I had the same, like, what are people going to say? Like, am I going to lose? I don't care. If you don't believe in what I believe in the good of the world, like, that's fine. You can, there's other people out there for you. But I feel like it's our responsibility as leaders. Brendan Burchard is like leading through this. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the post you put up, man, genuinely. I shared one today about sign the petition that police officers aren't allowed to have sex with the people that they arrest. Like, I didn't even know that was a thing. It's a strange time.
I literally have two friends of mine who were raped by cops.
Do you think that, why is this all coming out now?
So this is it. So I don't know, but to answer that question, So I'm just going to bring it back to what I said before about, like in my community, a leader was found molesting little kids. So I was on Twitter and I was kind of looking at this happening and people like exposing different people. And I want to say probably like 5% of the responses were people saying like, oh, well, why didn't she come about this? Why didn't she talk about this earlier? Oh, she's just looking for her 2 seconds of fame. And like, again, I don't know these people who are commenting this. I assume they're not terrible people, but they have just been listening to whatever BS their parents have been feeding them about various norms and traditions. Like, for example, I'll bring this back. Like in Egypt, for example, which is where my parents are originally from. I was born here, though, just in case people randomly think I'm talking about this. But if you talk to women there, they will tell you that they don't believe that they are better or are equal to men. I believe I was reading this article today that was saying on how watch this during slavery, most of the people that were against slavery were slaves because they were taught eventually after the first generation their family was kidnapped from Africa and they were put in a system. They were taught that, hey, this is your life. You obey people because you're not a human because you look black. And so you begin to look at these things and it's like these norms, these things are being held up by society, right, by the generation of people before them. And when you look at the generation of people before us, they're the ones that created the system that we're living in today.
Right.
That system is going to recreate the same thing that generation created. And so whether it's injustice, rape, whatever terrible thing it is, it's the system that we are in that was created in, I don't know, whatever, the 1700s, 1600s by people who aren't alive today, who don't have a lot of our same interests, who were living in a totally different world, creating these laws, these rules. And then people, especially smart people who have brains, who may use this stuff for bad, look at a power structure and they're like, I could abuse it right there, I could abuse it right there, I could abuse it right there. Nobody would ever know. And so they enter in these power structures, whether it's some sort of a pervert, a criminal, or whatever, that enters into it as a police officer, enters into it as a politician, or enters into it from whatever kind of position to take advantage of people. And so it's all kind of connected. And the reality is those people who are just repeating those things that their parents told them, like a common thing in the Middle East was like, oh, if you've been raped and you speak up about it, oh, what are people going to say about you because you've been raped?
Yeah.
It's like,
well, they're afraid they'll be judged or labeled or seen with pity all the time. I remember I dated a girl when I was much younger who got abused, and she was afraid that everyone in high school would look at her differently. And the truth is unfortunately some of that is true.
For sure. But I don't mean to interrupt you, but for sure it's true. But I think the best way we need to undo that is to bring it into the light.
I agree.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if we just keep doing this,
courage.
Like, this is going to keep happening.
Having the courage, yeah.
Yeah, like I don't understand how when I was reading everything regards to what I said today, I was like thinking about like one day if I have a future daughter and I have to like tell her like just try to like have these conversations with her, and it's just like, I don't want to say it's sad because it's the truth of what needs to happen, but this is definitely an evolution. And overall, I'm so glad what's happening today is happening today, even though it's causing a lot of pain to erupt. And so I think that's probably like the main thing that, at least like in my perspective, what people should take away from this is like, there's gonna be way more pain that's gonna come out. Yeah. And if you even see what's happening, literally it's like, okay, COVID happens, government doesn't really do anything. People start reacting to the government's response. People react to the reaction to the government's response. That leads to, what's always been happening, black people being disproportionately killed by police officers. That gets put in the light. That starts a movement. Then that starts another movement. That's about police brutality. Then you actually see police brutality happen all over the country with peaceful protests. That starts another movement that starts talking about the power structures and how the police is even funded. That starts a movement with this. everything right now that's happening in the Middle East with Me Too, that 100% was triggered by all these movements. Now there's stuff going on in India right now. There are all these movements that are being triggered by other movements. And really what it is just groups of people, leaders who are like, dude, I'm not going to be able to bring my future daughter in this world. Like, we literally need to change this. And whether that requires sacrifices, pain to look it right in the eyes, that's what needs to happen. So overall, super grateful what's happening now, because it's definitely going to be a bloody evolution, you know. And I think that, and I don't mean bloody as in violence. I don't think there's going to be like wide scale violence, but I just mean in terms of the pain and the challenge, and like the same way that like a caterpillar, you know, gets into and forms into a cocoon. That caterpillar's body has been reused into that cocoon, and now it's gone. And if the moth now is the cocoon is thinking, man, this caterpillar, like that, my body, man, it was so awesome, it's not going to be able to grow into its full stages of a butterfly. And so I think the main thing that's happening now is a lot of pain. And so I think as a leader, I'm looking at that of like, how can I enable more leaders? And then how can I personally deal with the pain of what's going on by realizing that I'm also human, and then also spreading that message, because I don't even think what started yet has even begun.
I think it's so important, dude. It's funny you said that the daughter thing. Alan and I were talking. We were crying after the mastermind the other night. I almost don't know a single woman that I know that hasn't been sexually abused, and we have a lot of women listeners.
Same.
So, you know, I want you guys to know, like, as much as I can humanly feel for you without feeling what you felt, I love you and I care for you, and it sickens me. Like, you know, if I had a daughter and that happened, there would be problems. I would probably murder somebody. Honestly, I don't know if I'd be, you know, and that bothers me because we're men. Like, we are three men here, and I don't ever want being a man to be a bad thing.
Right.
Toxic masculinity is a thing, and being, you know, overbearing and being abusive and all that.
Ego-driven. And
just, it's a weird thing how it's almost normal. It's almost like the weird stuff becomes normal. And I don't understand where that goes wrong in somebody's life for that to happen.
I think the biggest thing has to do with parenting. I think, just from what I've learned, I think what creates bad men are either a lack of a parent, a father, or the opposite of having a father who is terrible. Like, for example, I forgot her name, but I know this book just came out that Trump tried to sue, but it's by I think it's from something like his cousin or something wrote a book about him. And basically what she's saying is that the reason why Trump does everything that he's doing is because he's actually a traumatized and abused person from his father that did not let him experience various emotions. And so, for example, you know, I don't have any political affiliations, but that happens in someone's family. And then what happens? If they join a position of leadership, they do that same way throughout the entire country. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing. And I mean, dude, there are so many factors to it. Like, for example, if you look at, speaking of something else, if you look at what's happening in like Syria and Yemen, dude, you're talking about parents who have mostly been killed through war and through violence and through immigration and migration. Dude, these kids don't have parents. Yeah. Imagine how they're going to grow up in an area that's extremely destabilized, largely due to a lot of different forces from terrorism and also due to the United States, Western imperialism. Imagine who they're going to be when they grow up. So you just begin to think, I think that's probably the biggest thing, because it is... it is undeniable what happens in someone's life in like the first 15 years, speaking broadly, not affect the rest of their life at a very deep foundational level with their psychology. And a lot of that has to do with parents and who we are around at the beginning. So I don't know, man. You know, I know that there's a lot of guys out there who don't have fathers. Like, I know both of you guys.
Yeah.
But you guys were able to, whether it's find that in someone else or create that on your own or find other people like that gave you the same thing that you know would have happened if that relationship was in spot.
I think it's perspective, man. Like, And I always make the joke, like, we're on a rock that's spinning around the sun. If gravity takes a day off, we're all dead. But imagine this. Instead of...
It's the funniest thing I've heard.
Right. Dude, it blows my mind. That's what keeps me grounded. I swear to you.
Literally gravity.
Literally gravity, yeah.
If
Fact.
tomorrow, across all news channels, a 4-mile wide asteroid is barreling towards the Earth, guess what? I don't care anyway whether you're gay, straight, black, white. I don't care about any of that. But I guarantee a lot less people would. Because guess what? You're going to die. If we don't figure out everything, and that's almost why coronavirus, in a weird way,
For sure.
was a great opportunity for us to unite. Because we all had an enemy.
100%.
And now we're making each other the enemy. And that's where it's like, if there's an opportunity to take a side, people do.
Guys, it's fear versus love. If your fear is really high and you don't feel safe in your own skin or safe in your own home or safe in your own environment, you're going to be in a fight, flight, or freeze response, and you're not going to grow. And if you don't grow, you're not going to have the tools to succeed and create fulfillment. And if you're not fulfilled, you're going to inevitably hurt other people. Suffering begets suffering. And that's why with all this stuff, I've kind of always asked myself, like, what can I do about this? What can I do about this? So even from the beginning of us, like, right, I remember we were in the gym together, us three, and it was your gym, and we were like, what are we going to do? We all sat down with our notebooks and said, we're going to come out of this better somehow.
Yeah.
And, it comes down to you can never be sick enough to make someone else healthy. So for me, I've just gone inward. And I've tried to fix my own suffering.
Yeah.
And, the other night during the mastermind, Samantha Skelly came on. We did breath work, and it was just, we had 23 people in that room. I think 20 of them cried, legitimately.
Yeah.
It was powerful because I think we're all finally feeling that pain and healing it. I know I am. And so I think
what you
desire,
stepped on is the biggest thing.
the fear versus love.
No, healing.
Healing. That's the thing.
I think it's the biggest thing because I think perspective definitely plays a role in it, but I don't think these things alone can change the world. It's really healing, and one of the things that I've learned that's totally changed my mind is this whole concept of intergenerational trauma, and basically what it means is like we all understand trauma of sometime around 0 to 10, 11 years old, you experience some sort of experience that shifts your nervous system and then calibrates that for the rest of your life.
Right.
Unless you have another traumatic event, which then makes you find out like, wait, who the hell am I?
Right.
That is something that is not just going on an individual level. That is something that has happened ever since the beginning of history. Is it recording? Okay. And so basically what I've learned is like when you talk to a black person and there's any kind of like anger within them, it's not just like their own individuality. You're talking about
Right.
generations and ancestors before them. And the thing is that this is extremely practical. This is extremely science-based. We now know this to be true. I was speaking to a very famous neuroscientist, Dr. Daniel Amen. He's like Justin Bieber and Miley Cyrus's mental health doctor. And he was telling me that the next book that he's working on is called something like The Dragons in Our Cells. And basically what he's talking about is this whole thing of intergenerational trauma
Right.
and how it plays out. And so I think that's important because someone's life is not just like this slice of time of like from 1997 to 2012. This is like their entire generation of like what ethnicity they were, the people in their culture, what they did for thousands of years, whether they were slaves or kings or whatever. I think all these things play into a fact, and I think it's so important. And I personally, like, I don't know about you guys, to switch complete gears here. I've personally seen a lot of people, unfortunately, in the self-development world, like not really like take like a different, I would say, negative counterculture approach to this, and they're saying like, oh, your race doesn't really matter in America. You could do whatever you want. And I think a lot of that comes from like this motto that we always say in self-development of like, it doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter who you are. You could change anything about you. And that, of course, that's true. But I think that message needs to be heavily, heavily adapted
Right.
to fit for the real facts. And
Because it's deeper than just that blanket statement.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
it's much deeper.
Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's much deeper, and I think that that alienates a lot of people than trying to unite people. And so I think that's huge, especially right now, because I think people are definitely going to remember this from 10 years from now, for sure.
Do you guys feel like you've healed through this time at all? Any of your inner stuff?
I think for sure the healing is a 24/7 process.
I know, right.
The problem is I just keep becoming more aware. Like as I want to keep getting better. I don't want to just sit around and say like, oh, it'll get better on its own. I want to do what I can. And that's, for me, it's like having the standard of what do I do? Like, what can I do? Okay, I can talk about it. We have a platform. I can do these petitions. Right? I can do this. It's just, for me, it's continuously figuring out.
Right.
For me, the first step's awareness. Like when I realized how much, the transgender community goes through, I never would have known that because it's nothing I've ever experienced. I've never been racially profiled. I'm a white kid from a small town. I've never got denied from a job because I'm a woman. Right? So for me, it's like figuring out where are the things that I don't see so I can see them and then try to shine a light for other people to see.
I totally agree with that. I totally.
We got a couple minutes here. It's 3 o'clock. We have a couple minutes.
The last thing that I would say too is like on a final note of this is just like I think we should definitely be aware, but I also think there comes a time where it's better to shut things off. And obviously, I think everyone listening to this is in like a different spot on their journey. But I definitely think if someone is in like the middle of their journey, if they spend their entire day looking at Trump's Twitter or signing petitions, I don't think that's the most productive thing they could be doing. And I really do think that there's so much outrage or so much pain because of what's happening, because what we're talking about is some really serious things like rape, murder. Those are some really serious things. However, I do think there is incredible power in being able to say, like, I'm not responsible for the problems in the world. As much as, everything we said of, like, if you don't know it, then you may be complicit and you can't just ignore an issue. I totally agree with that. But I do think it's super important for people to say, like, I can't solve every problem in the world. And I need to have more conversations. I need to unite. I need to learn. I need to understand. Sometimes you just need to completely just shut off the entire world and just be with your own soul and mind and spirit, depending on where you're at. So I see that as like a final caveat.
For anyone listening to this episode, I think we should each round robin and just set one takeaway of like what they might be able to do to move forward with a little more certainty and a little more hope and optimism through all this challenging stuff. If you guys are game.
For me, I think it's in my perspective, the main way to have empathy is to have perspective. So searching for other people's perspective so you can at least understand what they've gone through and help them better go through. That's my takeaway.
Fire. Mark?
I think for me the biggest thing is I think it's actually what you said. And I'm not trying to like correct you or anything, but I think for me one of the most empowering things has gone from the spot of like me feeling like I have to constantly like fix who I am, to understanding that healing is not just a level of awareness even, it is the journey of the rest of your life. And throughout your entire life, you're constantly going through these evolutions of your character. And it's not because you're trying to fix, character version 3.0 from your past. It's trying to build on top of that and trying to grow past that so you don't even think about that again. So I think that's probably the biggest thing of like, it's a lifelong thing. It's not just like, oh, I fixed it. It works now. No, it's constantly. And I think when you approach it from that perspective, you're much more patient with yourself. And I think the last thing I'll say is that you get much more concerned with the direction of where you're going rather than speed. And I think a lot of us, especially guys who are action-oriented, very productive, I feel like we're always just trying to hammer down through these walls. And I definitely think that there comes a time where you have to do that. But I think that the other aspect of trying to heal yourself, where it's not so much black and white reality, it's more with your metaphysical soul, you cannot approach it like that. And if you do, I think it'll probably stress you out even more. So I think being able to say to yourself, like, I'm going to take my time and move in the right direction rather than just try to be like a speed demon and like copy what everyone else is doing because I don't think I'm that successful. That's the best way to go about it, in my opinion.
That's fire. So the thing that I'll say before we go here is, I was talking to Kevin about this earlier. There's a Stephen Covey analogy. I believe it's in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that I think is really relevant here. He says, imagine there's a team of people that have machetes and they're chopping down bamboo in this bamboo field. And they can't see past where they're chopping, and they're just chop, 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 speed, speed, speed. Someone goes and climbs a tree and says, we're trying to get over there, the village is over there, the resources are over there, and we're chopping in the wrong direction. So I think for everyone listening, I think what this episode is and what this time in history is go climb a tree and look at your life and your environment and your past and your present and what you want your future to be. Right now, you have a choice. I grew up in an environment that did say racist jokes. I grew up in an environment that did have alcoholism. I grew up in an environment that was a white suburban town in Massachusetts. I now have a choice based on a new awareness. And I'm looking at the bird's eye view and then deciding my trajectory. And I think that's what it comes down to is you are either going to, we use the analogy, and I'll be quick about this. Hitler burnt books to keep people ignorant so that he could stay in power. The opposite of Hitler burning books is writing books. Let's write our own books so that we affect all those around us. And I think that's the main thing I keep coming back to is grow and develop leaders, but leadership starts with you.
Fire.
I'm going to tweet that.
Different version of the Hyperconscious podcast today. But again, we all have platforms, and I want to make sure that we're doing our part in making sure we're spreading positivity, knowledge. I appreciate you coming on, brother.
Yeah,
I know this was a different one. I appreciate you being open, honest. And if you guys are watching on YouTube, another analogy we talk about is fail forward. We managed to screw the camera up in the first guest episode. It's a whole thing, but we will learn. We appreciate you guys. We love you guys. Follow Mark Metry, LinkedIn, Instagram, all that happy jazz. Humans 2.0 podcast. The man, the myth, the legend, Mark Metry.
Talk to you soon.